live in 2 minutes. Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Well, hello there. How you doing? I hope you're doing better than I am, I'll tell you that. I'm going to try not to sniffle, sneeze, hack, all that stuff too much in your ear. Welcome to a new week. It is June 6th. June 6th. And we got a hockey game here in Pittsburgh tonight. So, it's weird how when that's happening, it seems like that's all I live for. I just live from game to game. The last one being, a heartbreaker. But speaking of heartbreak, I haven't spoken to you since news of the death of Muhammad Ali. And it's hit me hard. I mean, even though I feel like we've been losing him for so long. But my respect for and love of this man was in some regards singular. I don't know that I've ever, I know we sometimes worship people we don't even know, but he looms so large in my life and he helped educate me. I feel like in some ways he mentored me and mentored the country at certain points. I grew, I think, because of his example. And if that sounds over the top, I'm sorry, but that's how big he was in my head. He was, if you think about it, in many respects, he had it all. He was a gifted athlete, obviously. He was more charismatic than anybody. He was smart as a whip. He was funny. He was an entertainer. He was principled. He was a man of great character. He was courageous. He was a leader. He was gorgeous. He was, I could probably keep going here, and I would defy anybody to challenge any word I've already applied to him. No, he wasn't perfect. He was a man. A wondrous man. So I came upon this, and maybe you've seen it, because so much has been written. I still haven't read this whole insert that the New York Times did yesterday, and I'm wanting to. He was being interviewed by David Frost in 1972. He'd be still in his 20s, I think. But he was already enough of a personage in his later 20s to have this renowned interviewer ask him, how would you like people to think about you when you're gone? Now, most people in their 20s and even their 30s, I don't think you even have a sense of being gone. And that kind of a question, like taking stock, whatever. But to think, this is a live interview, and he comes up with this. I'd like for them to say, he took a few cups of love. He took 1 tablespoon of patience, 1 teaspoon of generosity, 1 pint of kindness. He took 1 quart of laughter, 1 pinch of concern, and then he mixed willingness and happiness. He added lots of faith, and he stirred it up well. And then he spread it over a span of a lifetime, and he served it to each and every deserving person he met. Well, this is spontaneous eloquence, spontaneous poetry. The audience, it was before a live studio audience, the audience rose up and started cheering. He was like none other. I remember my first sense of him as being obnoxious. That's how he was presented to us. This braggadocio, in your face. And what was off-putting about that to white America, of which I was part, is that we had never seen a black man behave that way. And I initially was put off. I, who never met a black person, frankly. And of course, this is what I'm saying when I think of him as being my teacher in many ways. He would not. What bravery, in those days, what bravery to refuse to play the role that any strong black man was to play. Joyce Carol Oates, who writes a lot, is a big boxing aficionado. She pointed out that he just refused to live the way every other black boxer of note had lived prior to him, except, of course, for the tragic Jack Johnson. And what they were to be, and you'll know the phrase, was a credit to their race. And the way you were a credit to your race is keeping your place and exhibiting humility, right? So for this young black man to refuse to be humble, to instead go way over and to taunt, and it was very upsetting to a whole bunch of Americans. What is so interesting now is I wonder how many of the Americans who refuse to be taught by Muhammad Ali's example, who still think of him angrily as that loud, obnoxious. There's a lot of Americans who probably still feel that way about him. Too bad for them. Those are the folks who just can't change. So he was right out there. I mean, denouncing his slave name. Refusing to go to war. A lot of people weren't going to that Vietnam War, but they weren't doing it in the honorable way he did it. He flat out did it by the book. I got nothing, what did he say? I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong, he said. Among many other things. But he said, I'm a conscientious objector. I am not going to kill, and I'm not going to fight in your war. Sentenced to 5 years in prison. Height of his career. And he was willing to he did. He gave up everything. His championship. He had to turn in his boxing license. He had to turn in his passport because they didn't want him leaving the country and fighting outside the country. I mean, the vindictiveness toward him was extraordinary. And by the time he was allowed back into a boxing ring, he had lost the prime years of his career. And yet it didn't stop him. Remarkable man. Remarkable man. So then, the extemporaneous response to David Frost's question about how he'd like to be remembered is wondrous to me. But in writing his memoir, he revisited the question and then said this: I would like to be remembered as a man who won the heavyweight title 3 times, who was humorous, and who treated everyone right. As a man who never looked down on those who looked up to him, and who helped as many people as he could. As a man who stood up for his beliefs no matter what. As a man who tried to unite all humankind through faith and love. And if all that's too much, then I guess I'd settle for being remembered only as a great boxer who became a leader and a champion of his people. And I wouldn't even mind if folks forgot how pretty I was. How do you not love this man? Wow. And you know what else? Think of the cruelty of having Parkinson's for 30 some years. Think of what that disease did to him. It took from him everything that he was known for. His physicalness, his physicality, his mouth, his ability to talk. It even froze his face, that wondrous face. And you know what was so cool about this guy? Again, the courage of the man. He didn't hide as a vain person would. He didn't hold himself back once he was no longer pretty and no longer capable of just entertaining the room. Always. Smart, quick, funny. He knew humor was something very, very special. If you look at what he wrote in his memoir, it's the second thing he says about how he wants to be remembered. Humorous. Do you know, I mean, the animus toward him was extraordinary, and that he held his head high throughout it all. The vilification, the traitorous remarks, the threats to him. He was reviled as a young man. You know, even when he changed his name. He changed his name legally from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. And do you know that newspapers, that sports reporters refused to call him that? They kept calling him Cassius Clay forever. What I want to really read is more about his relationship with Howard Cosell, because I think that relationship shows the impact, the positive impact that Ali had on people, and how he pulled them along and made them grow. You could see it in that relationship with Howard Cosell, who ended up just loving him in every way. I mean, the New York Times called him Cassius Clay for like 3 years when that wasn't even his name. I'm so mad I never got to lay eyes on him in person. He was such a hero to me. I do have one degree of separation. I probably have that a lot but he lived on the south side of Chicago, sort of in the same neighborhood that Barack Obama came out of. Very nice neighborhood near the University of Chicago. And I had a second cousin who lived there. And his son, maybe about 8, 9 years old or something, was riding his bike in the neighborhood and fell and hurt himself pretty badly. And he happened to fall outside of Muhammad Ali's house. Someone saw it, someone came out. He was Lauren, his name. He was brought in to Muhammad Ali's house. And Muhammad Ali was there. And he treated this kid with such warmth and, tended to his wounds and then called his father. Everybody who ever had any kind of connection to him would say the same thing. He was one of the nicest human beings you'd ever want to meet. Where did I read? It might have been a letter to the editor in today's New York Times. Some guy was writing that he was a kid, sounded like sort of was probably my age, and he thought Ali was a braggart and a loudmouth and horrible. And he was at an airport once. He was like 12, 13 years old. And there was a crowd. And yes, the crowd was around Muhammad Ali. And he went over there and he watched as Ali signed autograph after autograph after autograph and was nothing but wonderful to everybody. And he then gets out his and asks Ali for an autograph, and Ali signs his autograph and then looks at him and says, "Don't you feel sorry for me having to sign all these autographs?" Oh, man. I'm a little surprised that he hasn't been buried already. Because in the Muslim faith, as in the Jewish faith, burial is supposed to take place within 24 hours after death. And I wonder if, I don't know. It said that he planned everything that we're going to see at this memorial on Friday. He planned it. He wanted it. I guess the people who were chosen to speak are people he asked. Again, doing the right thing. I remember my sister Susan saying, I think on the show, not too long ago, that her husband had done the same thing, and that is a real gift to your family and your friends and your loved ones. To say, this is what I would like, this is what you could do, and, you know, that'll be fine. That's what I want. Shit. I'm so bummed. It just seems like too many special people are dying. I suppose it is always thus, huh? Always thus. Okay. If any of you have anybody? Actually, the first time we got to Muhammad Ali entered our consciousness was the Olympics, right? Was that the 1960 Olympics? Right. It would have been, right? 1960 Olympics, and he won a gold medal. And that's the first we ever saw of Cassius Clay, this wondrous being. Bob Greene, I'm sorry, I keep thinking of things. Bob Greene, who was at Northwestern with me and then went on to be a columnist. Bob Greene was sent, I think, by Life magazine to do a long story on Ali, and he was flying with him from Chicago to, I think, D.C. or something. And as the plane was coming in, he was seated next to Ali, and Ali looks out the window and he says, "Just look at that. Isn't it amazing?" And Greene thought he was talking about just the lights. It was at night, and he said, "Yeah, it really is beautiful." And Ali said, "No, I was thinking, look at all those houses." He said, "I could probably knock on any one of those doors, and the people there would say, 'Muhammad Ali, come on in.'" He said, "Do you realize I could do that?" He said, "I sometimes think about just wandering the country, knock on doors, let people let me in. I'll sleep in their homes. I'll eat with them. They all know me." He was the greatest. So speaking of the Olympics, I was moved to see, it's rare that the International Olympic Committee ever does anything I approve of. But this I do approve of. They are allowing a team to be represented at the Olympics in Brazil, made up of refugees in this year that could be called the year of the refugee. If they're still doing, that man of the year stuff, that's who should be the man of the year. These faceless refugees, thousands of whom lie at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, children, women, desperate people. Refugees. And so there will be a team made up of refugees. And because they are from many countries, and there's no flag they can walk into the stadium with for the opening ceremony, so they will walk directly behind the Olympic flag. And there's something very moving about that to me. None of them are expected to medal. But they are from South Sudan and Syria and Iraq. They are from Ethiopia. And they are being, I guess, trained, or this whole effort came about because of a Kenyan, a guy who's won the New York City Marathon twice, and also the Olympics, the marathon, a number of times. And he is the leader of this delegation. That, to me, is the true spirit of what the Olympics supposedly are. And it's hard not to politicize the Olympics, as we know and we have seen. And this is politicizing them in a good way, a reminder to the world that is watching that we are not stepping up to this human crisis that is unfolding all over our globe. So it's not that this hasn't been done before. Athletes from East Timor in the 2000 Olympics competed under the Olympic flag because their countries, frankly, they were so young they had no Olympic committees. The same happened with South Sudan, the last Olympics. But sometimes when people are sort of without a country, the Olympics has found a way to let them in and let them compete and give them that public recognition. Here is a remembrance from one of you. I liked Muhammad Ali, but I have a slightly different perspective. In my previous life, I was a flight attendant. Muhammad Ali was a passenger on flights that I worked many times. An airline agent would always speak to the flight attendants before Ali boarded. He always boarded before other passengers. The agent's speech was always the same. Is there a black flight attendant working? Only black flight attendants were allowed to address him. If no black flight attendants were working, we were only allowed to speak to him if he addressed or asked us a question first. This happened every time I had him on a flight. He was always quiet and polite. What? Well, where was that coming from? The airline? That just doesn't jive with who he was, that it would be coming from him. Unless it was a certain point when he was... That is a very confusing story to me. Very confusing. So, changing the subject. The New York Times Magazine yesterday was odd. It was all about the life in Manhattan above 800 feet. So it was about the top floors of skyscrapers, and the fact that there's a whole different, speaking of perspective, the emailer said, I have a different perspective. Well, here's a different perspective, too. There are people in New York who literally look down on the rest of it. And for the purposes of the article, it was anybody living over 800 feet up. And the reporters, I'm sure intrepid souls if they work for the New York Times, could hardly find anyone who was willing to speak, who did live in those rarefied, because they're all so super rich. In order to live up there, you know, they pay like $50 million for their their condo. Or they own the top two floors of some huge skyscraper, but they live in Saudi Arabia, and they're never even there. They might, you know, be there on a weekend here and there. Ugh. But they talked about the fact that when towers were built in New York initially, they were not for living. Those were offices. These are office towers. The Empire State Building, nobody lived in it. It was offices, office buildings. Now, these huge, and they're building all over Manhattan now, because you can't go this way in Manhattan. It's filled. You got to go up. And they're going up and up and up and higher and higher and higher, and these ain't offices. These are for the super rich. And the merely rich who live on the bottom floors. I mean, Manhattan has been taken over by the 1%. That's all that's there now. And the stratification among them is really something to behold. And I don't even want to talk about that or them and their despicable amounts of money, which they do not use well, because if they did, they wouldn't spend it in such repulsive, ostentatious, in-your-face ways. The thing that got me in all of this stuff about up in the sky in New York, and the whole magazine's like this. In fact, you didn't open it like you normally would. You opened it like this. They tried to, everything was vertical in it. Everything, the whole issue. So you didn't turn the pages of the magazine like this. You turned them like this, which was, you know, I guess graphically and all that kind of stuff interesting. I found it frankly annoying. But in all this stuff that I'm reading about these damn huge buildings, the only thing I loved was reading about the men who build them, the men and women, and the courage. Can you imagine the iron workers and the lathers and the other people, the plumbers and the people who've got to be up there creating those edifices? But back to what I want to really freak about. There's a real building boom going on, and as I said, these are residential high-rises. Says here by 2020, which is just around the corner, right? 4 years. There are expected to be at least 14 totally residential skyscrapers in New York City. And here's the sentence that freaked me out. Many of these skyscrapers will block out the light for a great expanse of Central Park. I couldn't believe it when I read it. I went back and said, are you kidding? Are you kidding? Why would the city allow such a thing? Central Park belongs to everyone, not just these rich, not them. How dare they allow buildings so high in that and so close to the park that their shadows literally obliterate the sun? Where's the zoning board in New York City? What the hell? Am I the only one who... That just looked like... It's like a throwaway sentence. I need to write to the New York Times, don't I? I really do. I'm so blown away by that. The rich will even take our sun. They will obliterate the sun so that they can live in these, one trying to get on top of the other. Unbelievable. All right. So that's all I got on Muhammad Ali, this disquieting story from a former flight attendant that just doesn't fit with my love of him. I mean, if that story's correct, that would mean that the airline itself had to have. And I'm sorry. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Forgive me, but I'm not. Give me some years and it might help me. What years were these? If it was right in the middle of the Black Power movement, and it was a year or two there where he was much more militant about blackness. I mean, he like so many of us, black, white, and other, that were living in those turbulent times, we evolved and grew and, took different postures at certain times. So, yeah, it's conceivable, but this runs if, in fact, this was something where he would board, because this goes against everything else I'm reading. That he flew without an entourage, that he's standing on the corner hailing a cab by himself, that as a matter of fact, it was Bob Greene who wrote a piece about Ali was alone a lot. He didn't have all that constant crap around him. He didn't want it. It's just runs so counter. It's upsetting me. Okay. I gotta say, any of you go to Oberlin College? I was always an out there college. It was always, the hippy dippies went there before there even were hippy dippies. Matter of fact, my nephew's there now. Well, he's not there now. He's decamped to Russia, which I guess when you're at Oberlin is where you end up going. Oh, jeez. God. Oberlin is, with all this crap that goes on college campuses today, Oberlin takes the cake, I think. I feel that this can't even be true, but it must be because it is it's a reputable publication, and I'm just going to read the few sentences that you need. More than 1,300 students at Oberlin College. And let me tell you, that's a whole hunk of the percentage-wise of the student body. That's a relatively small school in a tiny little town in Ohio. More than 1,300 students at Oberlin College have signed a petition asking administrators to abolish midterms and all grades below C to accommodate their busy protest schedules. The students say that attending demonstrations against social injustice leaves little time to study. One student said, quote, "A lot of us started suffering academically." I want to round them all up and kick them into I don't know what. Jesus Christ. What a bunch of crybaby jerks. Okay. The other thing, do you want me to talk about Trump and all? No, as a matter of fact, let's stay on schools just for a second, because I forgot that I had this thing. I was going to talk about last week and then never got to it. So, here's a headline. Professors now face a dilemma between giving out accurate grades and protecting their lives. Jesus Christ. Texas college professors may soon face a dilemma because, it's not just in Texas. In a lot of states now, you can open carry on campus. So students can be packing, right? There was just a professor killed, right, the other day by a former graduate student at UCLA. So now there are firearms in the classroom. And professors are really scared. And I don't blame them. Because take with that the guns, and then this culture of these kids who really think that anything below an A is unacceptable. They've never had anything below an A, and they will not have anything below an A. And so professors they all have stories. I know my brother does. All have stories of kids coming to them and not just saying, crying and saying, you can't give me this A minus. You can't give me a B. Are you nuts? You're ruining my life. Take that and marry it to a slightly not quite stable personality, which at that time in a person's life is usually the case. God knows I wasn't a stable personality then. And you tell me, if you're a professor and you know a student is like a little out there, hot-tempered, and they earned a C, do you make that a B or an A just to save your life? Or so you can sleep at night? You think that's not going to happen? You bet it will. And there's this one professor who did talk about it. He said in a graduate course, he had handed back student papers, and a woman, one of the students, stood up, pointed at him, and said, "This is unacceptable." She then moved to the front of the class, waving the paper, "Unacceptable." And he said, "Hey, look, blah, blah," and this sort of, thing, exchange, and then she stormed out, and was sobbing in the hallway. And she had received a B on a paper that the professor said this was no big thing. It was a little, low stakes assignment of some sort. And she went that nuts. But the following week, the student brought along with her to the class a big, tough-looking guy. And he stared at the professor through the entire class with his arms folded across his chest. Other students said to the professor, hey, I don't want to, get too close to you because I'm thinking I could get killed in the crossfire because she's nuts. The professor writes, after that, every time she turned in a paper, I cringed and prayed that it was good so that I wouldn't have to give her anything less than an A. I was lucky that student didn't have a gun. Others have not been so lucky. I mean, students have shot their professors, but now if you're just flat out saying to students, sure, you go ahead. And, we hear that there's grade inflation that's been going on for years, but my Lord, this is now grade inflation coming from a totally different source, which is literal fear that you will die if you don't give a student an A. Oh, man. What a wild. So, that's what's happening on college campuses. Ain't that fun? My brother had an incident with a student. Before he taught law, he was teaching... I don't know what the hell he was teaching. He was teaching maybe English or Old English or Middle English or Norse sagas or something like that, because that's what he used to do. And he taught at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which is a small unit. Actually, that was the setting. That's where Edward Albee was when he wrote Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And imagined it's on that campus, lovely campus. So my brother was teaching there, and a student, her name was Ellen Marks, started stalking him. And it got she was not right in the head. It got so scary. And he was embarrassed because he was a man and she was a girl, and he was scared to death of her. He actually bought a gun. I remember, I think she had a gun. He bought a gun, and I remember screaming at him and saying, that is not going to help anything. And he said there were times when she'd be outside his house and he'd be like crawling underneath the window so she didn't see him. And he went to the police at one point and tried to get like a PFA or something, or and they laughed him out of the place because it was like, so I can't tell you exactly how he managed eventually to give her the slip, but I think he gave her the slip by deciding he'd rather be a lawyer, going to Yale, getting his law degree, and he got the hell out of Dodge. I'm not quite sure, but someone sent him a letter, because that was the days when you wrote letters. Someone sent him a letter about 10 years later with a clipping in it. And the clipping was from, I think, a newspaper somewhere in Indiana. And it was about a dismembered woman's body found in a dumpster. And it was Ellen Marks. He had contacted her parents and said, hey, blah, blah. I mean, you know, like, she was, oh, God, I'm telling you. Yeah, but let's put guns into the mix, because I think that would be a really smart idea. Okay. So, hang on. I just made a mistake and clicked on something that I thought might be good, and it not only, I was trying to read it while I was talking, and then I wasn't. Okay, the flight attendant has written back. No, it did not come from the airline. The people traveling with him would request it of the airline, 2 to 3 people. It became well known when we found out he was to be a passenger that we would get the speech. Sometimes celebrities had requests, and this was just one of those. I was lucky. He asked me when we were landing, and I was able to respond. This occurred mid to late 70s. That makes some sense then. So mid 70s, he's still, and that's the height of the black power, yeah. Wow. Well, he would not, if this were the 80s, it wouldn't be the case. Or the 90s, or the aughts, so, I'm sorry too. So the writer says, I'm sorry, Lynn, this was not to disparage him in any way. As I said, he was always quiet and polite. And then she has a memory of another passenger, Nancy Reagan. Nancy Reagan was another. We were only allowed to address the person traveling with her. This did not come from an agent, but from her companion. She would not look or speak to us. We would have to ask her companion if she would like a beverage. She would respond to him, and then he would turn to us and answer. She was also quiet, but not polite. She was a regular traveler between the time when Ronald Reagan was governor and president. Okay, thank you. One of my best friends is a former travel agent, and I know she has very definite opinions about some very important people by virtue of her interaction with them in that capacity, and how some are, really fine, regular human beings, and how others are just SOBs. And they aren't always the ones you think. Craig writes, Ali's refusal to submit to military service in Vietnam was a prominent guide to my gradually developing awareness of so many threads of social justice and peace. He was a teacher. After reading the New Yorker version of Oberlin, I can say that we continue to evolve toward a less judgmental and more carefully thought out society. Well, I don't know about that. You think Oberlin is indicative of a better thing? As I think it's off the rails. Why aren't I understanding anybody today? I feel like I'm just sort of missing everything. So I was reading this. Okay, wait. Just quickly, because the day cannot go without me saying something about Trump. What's interesting is that you got the Republicans, even those who have endorsed him, now freaking out about his statements about the judge, and he's doubling down on him, and now he's saying a Muslim judge couldn't judge him, and blah, 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 blah. And I saw that in one interview, the guy's interviewing him, I guess, yesterday, and he said, well, but Mr. Trump, we have like a tradition in this country that, a person's ethnicity, and I'm thinking, It's not a tradition. I mean, this is where I want to strangle the reporter. It isn't a tradition. It's the fundamental precept upon which the country was founded. It's not a tradition. It's the Constitution. It's the foundation. It is not up for, debate, frankly. And anyone who knows the Constitution, which one would hope a possible president would, listen to this from a lawyer who's a conservative. He says, this is how authoritarianism starts. It starts with a president who does not understand what the judiciary is. You can criticize the judicial system. You can criticize individual cases. You can criticize individual judges. But the president has to be clear that the law is the law and that he is the enforcer. He has to enforce the law, not belittle it, not even comprehend it. That is his constitutional obligation. When Hillary Clinton says he is unfit, And then you have the guys who are supporting him, and listen to how they support him. John McCain. Well, I still believe we have the institutions of government that would restrain someone who seeks to exceed their constitutional obligations. We have a Congress. We have the Supreme Court. We're not Romania. That is him trying to say that if Trump is elected president, we'll survive. That is somebody who has endorsed Trump. That is John McCain, a man who wanted to be president himself, saying, don't worry, we're not Romania. We still have institutions that might be able to keep him in check. This is a man that he endorsed. It's Mitch McConnell, another one. He'll have the White House counsel there. See, they're just praying that he'll be able to be managed. Anyone who thinks anyone can manage Donald Trump is out of their friggin' minds. And no, Mitch McConnell, John McCain, and the whole Republican Party almost has definitely shown themselves to be without honor, without character, without patriotism, because they know how dangerous this guy is, and they're just hoping to contain him while they maintain some power. It's really unbelievable. Henri writes, Lynn, my wife and I watched a few very nice retrospectives of Ali's life over the weekend, and I think we both have more respect and appreciation for him than we did prior to his death. We are both nearly your age, and neither of us have ever thought much about Ali all these years. I don't mean to take anything away from what is obviously a very blessed life, but I just never held him in the high regard that you and apparently much of the world did. I think most people only see the boxer and not the humanitarian or activist that he was. Well, I'm glad, Henry, that you saw what you saw, and I would refer you to some documentaries that have been done. He was remarkable. There's a reason he's probably the most well-known human being on earth. Almost. He's definitely in the top 5. And it wasn't just, and a lot of people, even the people who are boxers, are saying he might not have been the greatest boxer. I mean, that is up for, but he was the greatest. I would seek out Howard Cosell's thoughts about him. Because as I said, Cosell knew him. Cosell up close and personal. And Cosell did not have a positive reaction to Cassius Clay or to Muhammad Ali in the early years. He thought, like white America thought, what the hell is going on with this guy? He didn't seem like a gentleman. He seemed like a braggart. He seemed like seemed like a narcissist. He was a showman. He was a consummate showman. He was a Donald Trump with a heart and a head and honor and courage and intelligence and all those other things. But he was a showman and a promoter by nature. As for the students today, Lori writes, I think this comes from two places. The ridiculous sense of entitlement they were raised with and the fear of the competition for good jobs available and the belief that if they don't go to the best schools, get the best grades and best internships, that they'll never get ahead in life. Well, I think that's where it's coming from too, but isn't that sad? What are their values? What is the value? That life is a competition? Life is a race and a competition to get to the top, to get money, to get the best? That is so pathetic and so soulless and so bound to lead to nothing good. And that's what parents have created in so many of these kids. Not all of them, but a whole bunch. Those are the values we've passed down. You got to get ahead of everybody else. It's despicable. It's like parents like setting their kids up for misery. Wow. First, you don't let them have a regular life. You program them all the time and play dates and all that shit. Then you tell them they're simply wonderful and the best. And then you overschedule them and definitely make them feel that they had better be the best. That's like child abuse to me. Better to be raised by wolves. Truly. I'm not even kidding. Truly. God help these kids with all these helicopter fucked up parents. Teaching them how to be a success in America. Because being a success in America might even be totally the opposite of being a success in life. The qualities and the skills that you would want your child to have, to live a good and honorable life. If you send them out into the muck of the capitalist competition of money as the value and being on top as the value, you've condemned them to a life of meaninglessness. And on that happy note, I'm out of here. Go Pens.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.